everybody, my name is Jill Jonathan and I'm with Red, Wine, and Blue. Red, Wine, and Blue is a community of women who use digital media and friend-to-friend organizing to change the world one suburb at a time. And one way we are doing that is by having the tough conversations, learning each other's stories, talking about the things that actually need to be talked about. So today I am incredibly excited. Jo Carducci, as in JoJo from Jers, will be joining me as always, so I'll have her join as soon as I see her. And then we have a very special guest, Alejandra, and I will ask her how to pronounce her name correctly, because as someone who has a last name that's mispronounced all the time, I want to make sure I get it right. Yay, there they are. Okay, awesome. So there's Jo and Alejandra, and please let me know, how do we pronounce your name correctly, your last name?
Caraballo.
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 Okay. I'll try to say that right. Like my last name's Jonathan, we get Johansson, Jonason, we get it all. So I'm like, I just want to make sure I get that out there. And then Jo, it's always so great to see you. I'm really excited about this conversation because, like I said, one way we're trying to change the world is by conversations, right? Yeah. We've got to be open. We've got to talk about what's going on. But first, Alejandra, I would just love to know your story. Like, how did you get to be where you are today, testifying in front of Congress and all the things that you're doing today? How did you even get here?
Yeah. So, right now I'm a clinical instructor at the Cyber Law Clinic at Harvard Law School. But prior to this, I worked 2 years as a staff attorney at the Transgender Legal Defense Education Fund. So I primarily worked on federal litigation regarding access to gender-affirming care. And then we also sued the Trump administration in 2020 regarding their rollbacks around protections for LGBTQ people in healthcare. And then prior to that, I worked for 3 years at the New York Legal Assistance Group doing direct legal services, primarily immigration, family law, name changes, stuff like that. Almost all my clients were trans Latino women from Central America seeking asylum. So it was quite a bit of a time doing immigration law during the Trump administration, especially asylum work. And so, I've been doing that for kind of years, and really, like, when I started at TILDF, I really started to get more like consistent about monitoring the anti-trans movement. And it really started like kind of documenting and watching like the gender critical subreddit on Reddit, and then kind of monitoring some of these spaces. But then I think really starting into 2019, 2020, it really started to become more aggressive, and I started to see it like really start to break through in terms of like the way that it was affecting litigation around gender affirming care cases. And then by obviously like 2021, 2022, like it really just kind of exploded into the mainstream. And then last year we kind of saw this like big moral panic breakout, particularly like instigated by accounts like Libs of TikTok and others. But really just like basically, we're now to the point where a trans person drinking a Bud Light is enough to stoke or to incite bomb threats and like half this country to lose its goddamn mind. But yeah, so I once I kind of finished my time at TILDF, I was kind of burnt out doing LGBTQ work day in, day out professionally, and kind of felt I needed a break. So I moved over here to the clinic, where I really felt like I would be able to kind of focus on more academic things and more like stuff on technology, which has always been a passion of mine. So I've really kind of honed in on this nexus of gender and technology, and I've also kind of expanded into my academic focus being on abortion rights and the intersection with technology around like telemedicine and issues like that. So that's kind of what I've been spending my kind of daytime working on, and then writing about that for like Slate and Wired. But I still continue to monitor a lot of the far right and the anti-trans stuff, especially since like that has really become kind of the key driver of transphobia. And so I kind of keep tabs on all of that and really help to track what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, first of all, it's really a pleasure to meet you face to face or screen to screen. I am a big fan of your advocacy, and I'm a huge fan of your voice and your passion and your fierceness and fearlessness. I found you on Twitter. I just absolutely am astonished every day by, well, in a good and a bad way, by your fierceness, but in a bad way by what you're exposing. But I thank you for that, because one of the things that Jill said about these conversations that I think is so important is that so much of this is beyond the scope of my reality, right? Like this isn't, I have never walked a day in your shoes. I've never, I want to learn more and I want to understand more, because what's happening is there's so much disinformation and vilifying coming from one side, particularly on these issues right now, that these conversations are more important than ever, so that we can shed some light on the reality of it, the truth of it, and stop sort of making it all of this some boogeyman that they're using. So thank you, and nice to meet you. And so I wanted my first question for you, honestly, is first of all, because of your fierceness and what you're navigating, how are you doing right now?
Yeah. I would definitely say like the last year has really kind of taken its toll on me, and it's like it's really interesting because like I always will always get a good therapist, and but it's like my professional life is great, my personal life is great, like I have a loving partner, my family is super supportive, like biometrics on that end is fine, but then there's just like this constant existential dread of like all of this stuff going on. And honestly, in the past year, it's just been absolutely surreal, as I've gained a pretty massive platform and kind of come under the scrutiny of like some of the worst people on the planet. And so it's like you know for like a kind of a sense of like what that means. It means like having to meet with the FBI because of death threats and bomb threats being sent to me like fairly regularly. I've probably gotten about 15 in the last month and a half, and not aimed at me directly but aimed at other places, weirdly, like schools and particular people. And then, obviously threats made against me, just all kinds of, surreal stuff. Like I've been doxxed, my parents were doxxed, having like all of this information just put out there, like being cyber stalked and all of these things. And then having like, getting heads up from people that like the Proud Boys put me on a national list for, like of their people that they're watching. So like, like all of that is just kind of like the kind of cost of doing this activism. In some ways it shouldn't be, but like I feel like I have a really good support system and I have a really good foundation to be able to do this and handle this. So not to say it doesn't obviously take its toll on me, but like I do have the ability to kind of take this on. So there's not very many like trans folks out there that are able to like speak out on this and be able to constantly push back on these like horrific narratives that are constantly being pushed by the far right. And so that's really one of the things that I try to do. And then so I don't lose my mind, I do a lot of like casual shit posting on Twitter, but that's just because like if I focused on this stuff 24/7, I think I would absolutely lose my mind, because it is just, it's so bad, and there's just so much going on every day. I mean, every single day is a different legislature targeting us. And like last, just earlier today, like I'm from Florida, and the Florida Senate is about to pass a bill criminalizing trans people using the bathroom consistent with their gender identity. And my family lives there. I had to spend an hour on the phone with my grandmother a few weeks ago telling her why like I might not be able to visit her again. And so like this is also personal. Like it's not just, I may think I'm like safe here in Massachusetts, but I'm not, because they're not going to stop. And so like, that's the other thing, is it feels like a lot of this is like I don't have a choice. Like I have to do this because eventually like they're going to come for me. Like, I might not be a trans person living in Arkansas or Missouri, but it's not going to stop there. And so for me to just say it's not my problem, I think is abdicating my responsibility as not even just as a trans person, but as just a human being that like can empathize with people who are struggling, but also realizing like at the end of the day, like this isn't going to stop. Like they're going to continue until, you know, as Michael Knowles said, like they want to eradicate trans people from society. Like that's their end goal. And yeah, it's not a secret.
I just want to take a second to just sort of pause and realize, you know, the implications of what you're saying. What you're like, I'm emotional. I cry a lot, but I'm super emotional because, you know, you are putting yourself at risk. You're sacrificing your safety because you see something larger than yourself right now, that you have a chance to impact the change and to sort of take up the torch and carry it along and continue this fight, like you said, because you know they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop with Ron DeSantis. They're not going to stop in Montana. They're not going to stop with drag bans. They're going to keep going. And the idea that you're being threatened is to silence you and to make you be quiet and to be afraid and to go away. And it takes real fortitude and real bravery and real personal sacrifice to be able to do this work, this incredibly important work in the face of all of that. And again, it puts a face to what people may see on the news and not, I don't, you know, say, I don't know anyone who's going through that. It doesn't matter to me. This doesn't affect me. And then you meet someone like you and you're like, well, hold on a minute. I care about this person. I care about their grandmother. I don't know their grandmother. I care about your grandmother, you know, and the fact that you might not be able to be safe visiting your family in Florida. And I just like, I'm sorry that that's happening. I just wanted to also add, because this isn't something that like is all of a sudden getting attention for no reason. This isn't something we pulled out of the, you know, the clouds. This 2023 marks the 4th consecutive record-breaking year for anti-trans bills being considered across the country from the previous year. This is a real statistic. This is really happening. I checked last time, you would know better than me, 447 anti-trans bills in 41 states, 8 passed, 401 active. This is a real thing that is happening. And a lot of people really don't understand the complexity of it. There is this idea, like you just said about Michael Knowles, about people wanting to eradicate your very existence. I mean, I can't even imagine how that would feel. Why should anyone have to fight for their inherent existence? And here you are.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I always hate like being able to, or like taking examples from other groups that have been targeted in the past. I always feel like it's sometimes a cheap way to get people to understand, but sometimes it's just like it's the only clear way to make people understand like what's being said here. And like when someone says we want to, you know, transgenderism must be eradicated, you know, like just replace that with another ism that like personifies another group, like Judaism, for example. Judaism must be eradicated. Well, what does that mean? Like, you know, they say, oh, you know, and they'll come up with all this other stuff, but like at the end of the day, like you can't eliminate an idea. You can't eliminate this like concept of a person. Like you can only eliminate people, and so that's the end goal of it. And a lot of it is just them not willing to be in some ways an honest bigot, because they'll say like, well, we're not talking about the person, we're talking about the ideology. And this is one of the things that they constantly do. Is one of the ways that they get to dehumanize people is that they say, we're not talking about trans people, like, oh, we care about trans people. We're talking about this radical gender ideology. Or we're not talking about like just your typical trans person. We're talking about trans activists. But then when you see who they call trans activists, it's literally any trans person who's like at all that exists. So they use that as a way to dehumanize. And it is like, it is a very like, existential dread to have to deal with. And it's like constantly you're being pulled in like these two different ways. It's like I exist in kind of two different worlds where I'm like in this like very formal like academic setting here at Harvard. And, you know, I think there, especially among the more liberal minded kind of classical liberalism, there's this idea of like, oh, well, we should have free speech. and debate, and like we should really discuss these ideas. And like, but when like the other side is like saying, well, we want to eradicate these people, or like, you know, the whole you know, there was the Riley Gaines thing in California where she got run off by protesters. And like what people are forgetting is that she was in a Zoom call with Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA, where he said, you know, he wished like they would take care of trans people the way they did in the 50s and 60s, and pretty much insinuating like lynching trans people. And she agreed with him. And so like that's where we're at, right? We're not like, you know, and I think a lot of people who don't pay attention to this debate and don't follow this don't understand that and don't see that aspect. They just see, oh, well, you know, these two sides are fighting each other. There's got to be some kind of compromise. And I've seen countless like moderate centrists like dip their toe into this and then like immediately get chewed out by both sides. And not that there really should be a both sides to this, but it's essentially like one side being like, our existence is literally being attacked. And these people are literally pushing fascist policies to get rid of us. And you're over here trying to say, oh, well, you know, what's the reasonable compromise here? And so, and then the far right obviously doesn't want any compromise because they want us gone. So it's really frustrating. And I always have to constantly remind myself that like, obviously Twitter and like these other places are not real life, because when I'm talking to other people, like none of them know about this. Like I was in LA 2 weeks ago for UCLA for the Williams Institute conference, and I was literally speaking about this to a bunch of people from various national LGBTQ orgs, kind of the professional gay classes, I call it. And I was trying to tell them about the Dylan Mulvaney Bud Light story. And I had to like take a step back and explain what happened, because hardly anyone in the room knew about it. And these are people that work in LGBTQ orgs and are like there to talk about like issues that affect the trans community. And when I was talking to my mom, who like constantly follows the news, she hadn't heard about it. And then like I was later at a gala reception that was honoring Nancy Pelosi, and I was like talking to all these like prominent gay lawyers, and like none of them had heard about it. And you know, and I was like sitting here thinking, and I was like, yeah, like it always reminds me, is like the average person is like not like they don't see this stuff, like, and I fear like in some ways, especially Twitter, but these online ecosystems are becoming so like hermetically sealed that like people don't understand what's happening, and then at the same time it's creating like insane consequences, such as like bomb threats being made at a Bud Light factory, right? Like, so, you know, and death threats being made against the executives at Anheuser-Busch. And so like we have to deal with this, right? Like this is an issue, and like, and it's really frustrating when I see it at the national level with like big national media. They are like whitewashing a lot of this. They're like, oh, the Bud Light controversy. I was like, well, what's the controversy? Literally, Bud Light partnering with a trans person. That's it. Like, that's it. Like, it's literally just the fact that they acknowledge that a trans person exists. Like, that's the crime. That, you know, and so it's like, you know, and people just kind of don't see it. Like, they just don't understand it. And like, one of the reasons why the far right has made that the issue to die, like, or to the hill to die on, is because like what it is about sending a message. Is about intimidation. It's about trying to scare the crap out of every single brand from ever partnering with a trans person ever again. And like, that's the point. And it's a terror campaign. That's exactly what this is.
Right. And you said on your Twitter that this rhetoric works, right? Like it does. Like you said, I mean, they're death threats against, you know, people at Anheuser-Busch because they partnered with a trans person. Now it's Maybelline, I think, is the newest one. Like all these rose. Yeah, right. Like, and I mean, it's absolutely insane, first of all. But like you said, like you in the real world, like some of the stuff on Twitter that's like a tinderbox because it's so compressed and everybody's just sort of so angry all the time. Like this Bud Light thing really did blow up into something. But at the same time, because there are people on there who consume that and are thirsty for that and hungry for that, the Tucker audience of the world, and they want that and they just need that little spark to the kindling that is their anger and rage they can't quite put a name to, then they're going to take that and they're going to see the rhetoric and they're going to go out and act on it. And they're going to make a death threat. And like, this is what happens right now. This is the world we live in. And it's insane, but this is where we are. And I want to talk a little bit about what is happening in the States. Because again, like what is happening in the real world, but isn't necessarily getting enough attention in mainstream media. We could talk about Florida first if you want to. I know you know a lot about what's going on with Ron DeSantis. Maybe I guess that's the most sort of infamous case, but then there's Missouri right now that you've been talking a lot about. Of course, there's what's going on in Montana. So I guess you want to jump into Florida. What is Ron DeSantis doing?
Yeah, I've really been tracking Florida because it affects me personally. Like I have my family is still there, and I usually go 2 or 3 times a year to visit. And you know, I grew up there, born and raised, went to college there, like spent like the vast majority of my life in Florida. So it deeply affects me, and to see my home state like go this way is just deeply distressing. But you know, I think particularly you know, like DeSantis this year, like because I think part of this like speaks to like a failure of the Democratic Party. They made a concerted decision in 2021 that they weren't really going to challenge DeSantis for re-election, and they basically pulled like all of the DGA funding and didn't really give any assistance to the candidates there statewide. And so, you know, now that they've done more in-depth studies about what happened in the re-election campaign in 2022 in Florida, it wasn't that like DeSantis convinced all these moderates and turned all these like the state red. It's that 1 million Democrats stayed home. And 1 million voters stayed home, and that because he didn't get many more votes than he got in 2018. In a year that,
it was just his people that showed up, right?
Yeah, that's what it was. And part of it is you know, I used to work in political campaigns in Florida in 2008, 2010, and Florida Democratic Party has just been like one of the most incompetent in the country, and it like for the longest time they were. This is one of those reasons why like this obsession with the white working class I think sometimes is like this red herring or this like mirage, because for the early 2010s and the late 2000s and early 2010s, the Florida Democratic Party kept hoping that they could turn around the white working class in the Panhandle and North Florida, and they systematically never disinvested from organizing in South Florida, in Miami, Broward County, all those areas, Tampa, and they did not extend outreach to any of all like the Latina community. They would just put out ads, Spanish language ads in October, and then call it a day. And so the Republicans, on the other hand, were opening up community offices in all of these neighborhoods. They were hosting potlucks, they were hosting dinner events, they were hosting like church gatherings. And so they were essentially, what the Republicans were doing in South Florida was doing what DSA was doing in New York City. They were reaching out to people, building community, and then using that to build and leverage a political movement. And it's frustrating, the like incompetence on the part of the Democratic Party there. But you know, so they won big last year, and DeSantis is obviously, you know, planning to run for president. And this legislative session has been all about what can help DeSantis win in 2024 or to win the primary. And so they passed the 6-week abortion ban. They have a bill that would criminalize gender affirming care, not just for trans youth, but also for adults. If you have a nurse practitioner, if you're a trans person and they're your primary care provider, they can no longer prescribe you hormones because that would be a misdemeanor crime. You can't see them via telehealth because that would be a misdemeanor crime. So it is criminalizing trans health for adults. It is also legalizing kidnapping by granting emergency jurisdiction over trans kids who are present in the state. It's eliminating the options to change your gender marker on your birth certificate. There's a bill obviously criminalizing access to using the bathroom that's consistent with your gender identity, which several trans men with thick burly beards went up there and were like, if this bill passes, you want me to be in the women's bathroom. And you know, to highlight the absurdity of it, but they don't care. Like there's this like sociopathy that has just infected them that they don't care. And there's obviously the drag ban, and they put in a last minute amendment to that bill that would make it a misdemeanor crime for a public official to have granted a permit where a quote unquote adult live performance is to have taken place, which what they mean is drag. They don't say it because they use the same tactic that they did with Don't Say Gay. They're like, tell me where it says gay in the bill. It doesn't say gay in the bill. And I'm like, the Constitution didn't say slavery either, but we had slavery for nearly a century. So don't tell me like just because it's not in a bill, it's not going to be impacted. And we know exactly what's going to happen. And so, but if you're dealing with the fact that like a public official who's granting a permit could be charged and thrown in jail for granting a permit to a pride parade that features somebody dressed in drag performing, like what's going to happen is the exact same thing as the book bans. What's going to happen is what we've already seen. There was already one parade that was canceled last weekend in anticipation of this bill being signed because it goes into an immediate effect. But what we're going to see is local officials pulling permits. And then when that creates a national news item, DeSantis will say, I had nothing to do with this. This is the local officials. They're over enforcing this. The exact same playbook he did with the book bans. This is overzealous, like local officials, right? And then if others cancel, then on the back end, they'll just say, oh, well, they're admitting that this isn't appropriate for children. And so, like, it's just, like, it's troll legislation because they don't want to own up to what they're doing, and then they do it in such ways that, like, minimize. It's the same thing with the bathroom bill. The way that they're doing this is by threatening operating permits or licenses for businesses around the state. So if you don't enforce your bathrooms being separated by assigned sex at birth and not allowing trans people to use the bathroom because they're gender identity, you could lose your license to operate. You could lose your liquor license. And you could get a lawsuit by the Attorney General. And so this is what it's trying to do. It's trying to pit people against each other. And instead of like having the heavy hand of the state be the real like omnipresent force, it's the fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt that they're really foisting upon the state of Florida. And yeah, it's an all-out war against trans people in there. And it's the same thing. They've done it with the schools. They're doing it with the universities. They're eliminating tenure. They're creating a system that is going to be rife with graft because they're going to let the trustees determine who gets tenure and who gets appointed to universities. And these are political appointees. And as we've seen, like DeSantis is appointing his political buddies who have no experience running universities, no credentials, and they're getting paid $700,000, $800,000 a year to run universities that they have no qualifications to run. Right. And we've seen that with New College, with Chris Rufo being appointed to the trustees. And so it's an all-out war. I mean, not on just like the civil rights movement and like everything from the 1960s. It's almost a war on enlightenment entirely, because it is like trying to eliminate any sense of like academic freedom, broad freedom, like even to discuss, issues of systemic racism, the existence of LGBT people. And it's unlike anything I've ever seen. And it's being done in an underhanded way that is making it near impossible to litigate in court, because it's being done through private rights of action, which are lost like bouncy bills, essentially. And it's being done through these kind of like fear tactics, where the fear of like enforcement is what's causing the action.
And we're seeing this in state after state after state. You said something about in Florida, this is not just about kids under 18. This is about impacting adults too. And we've seen that as well in Missouri, I believe, right? And Missouri and maybe Montana, if I'm not 100%. Yeah. So here's my question. It's an overall question, because this is something I don't necessarily understand, even though I have some idea. Statistically speaking, at least what I've seen, maybe you could tell me if I'm right or wrong, but most Americans actually are in favor of protecting the rights for LGBTQ Americans, for LGBTQ people across the board. It's like in the 60%. So what is the end goal here? What is the advantage? We've seen this also in the gun conversation about sensible gun laws. What is the advantage to running to the right of a Trump, or to pushing this kind of extremism? What's the upside for them?
Yeah, for a lot of them, there is no real political upside, as we've seen. Like, American Principles Project spent like $50 million messaging trans issues in the midterms. The candidates in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona all ran on this. So did like Herschel Walker in the special election. And they all ran on like banning gender affirming care, going against trans people, and they all lost. This is not an issue. This may be an issue that animates like some like 5% of the Republican base or 10% of the Republican base, and they're very vocal about it, but it does not translate into actual votes. Those people were already voting for Republicans anyways. And so what I try to tell people is that the truth about like the public's feelings about trans people is that they don't care. They just don't care. They have too much going on in their lives. They have working 2 jobs. They have kids to feed. They're like, dealing with the daily rat race that is life. They just don't care. And that's really terrible for us when we're trying to eliminate disparities in healthcare and employment and housing and try to get protections put in place. It makes it difficult to get popular support on those things and get like that kind of salience of the support. But on the other hand, it also means that they don't really care about these issues when we're being targeted, right? So they don't really want to vote for people that are being like super transphobic. And this has happened in the UK. The UK has been like about a year ahead of and it's much more secular in nature than it is here in the United States, but it's about a year ahead of where like the United States is, right? Broadly, or 2 years. And, they've been messaging with every major paper in the entire UK, like just basically constantly hammering like anti-trans moral panic. Like the support for trans people around various things has like slipped quite a few points. But then when you ask them, like, is this going to affect your vote, or is this like, does this actually matter? And like the people who are most concerned about it are the like least inclined to vote. So, or like have that affect their actual vote. So what it really means is like people just generally just don't care. They don't know trans people. They've never met trans people. And so like I constantly try to make this point, but it does hurt on the back end, because when we're getting these bills that are targeting us and criminalizing our healthcare and criminalizing our existence, people aren't going to vote them out either. So what they've realized is that this isn't a political, like it may get them engagement on social media. It may get them some attention on, within conservative circles. But the main thing is that there's not a political cost to this. There's not a political gain either, but they can just basically scapegoat and be as cruel as they want to trans people, and there's not really as much of a political cost to this. And so I think that's really what's driving a lot of this.
That's terrifying, obviously. We're going to kind of wrap up, but and thank you for all this time, but I wanted to go back to something that you said in the beginning, where you were talking about how it's not going to end with you and it's not going to stop with you. And I wanted to ask you, like, what would you say to someone who's 12 or 13, 14, coming up right now in this world, in this culture, in this society, watching what they're seeing unfold before them and feeling afraid and ashamed and scared? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say we're gonna win. Like, it doesn't mean that it's gonna be easy, and it doesn't mean that it's gonna be a clear path, and that we're that like it's set in stone. But I think in reality, like what I've really come away with in the last few months is that this push right now is an acknowledgement that they're losing. Yeah. This is desperation on their side. Power doesn't panic, and they are panicking right now because they realize the next generation is 20% LGBTQ, is majority minority, is broadly progressive. And millennials are now the first generation to not go conservative as they get older. And so they realize there's a demographic time bomb coming for them. And so they are trying to entrench themselves as deeply as they can. And so, I know how immediate it feels, how desperate it feels right now in this moment. And we want it just to desperately be over immediately. But the reality is it's going to be a long fight, but we will get there. I try to remind people in 2004, several states passed bans on marriage equality, right? And even in 2008, California voted on Prop 8 to ban same-sex marriage. And not even 7 years after that, the Supreme Court made it the law of the land. So, this is a temporary setback and a retrenchment, but in the long term, these people are going to lose. They are not the future of this country, and they know it, and that's why they're panicking. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be costly. It's not going to suck for a few years. And so, I think you have to brace yourself, but I think at the same time, have hope. Hope is going to be a daily practice. It is going to be a habit that you're going to have to build, because there are going to be some really dark days. And it's that hope for a better day that is going to get you through it. And so I really think just hold on. There are a lot of people fighting for you, and we're going to get through this.
I'm trying not to cry. Because that is so inspiring. And I agree with you, by the way, about why they're doing this, why they're desperate. I'm going to steal this "Power Doesn't Panic" quote for the rest of my life.
I wrote it down. Yeah. I have a little notebook. I was like, that's great.
Because they are definitely feels like they're in their death throes, and there is nothing off the table right now for their survival, which all of the other indicators of the direction the country is going in are telling them that they're going to be voted out in short order. But like you said, it's going to suck for now. And then I am bolstered by what I've seen happening in Tennessee with the Tennessee 3, and in Montana with Zoe Zephyr, and the voices, the young people, the passion, like you said, that you're not alone, that people are out there fighting this fight. You are an incredibly powerful and fierce and fearless voice in this fight. I'm so glad. I'm better for this conversation. I'm better for just being able to know you, and to see your perspective and insight on these things, on these issues, and to know that you're a warrior out there fighting. I thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you too. And I just want to, I see it in my own community. So I live in a suburb of northern Cincinnati. So Ohio, that is where I am. And we are seeing an attack at the school level, the school board level, but our community is gathering together, and we're like, no, this is not right. We're not going to stand for it. So it's true. I think that we, power doesn't panic, like you said, and community, it's coming together and saying that's not right, and we're not going to stand for it, and we're going to speak up. And I don't know what else we can do at this point, but we just keep using our voices. And I'm just incredibly grateful for you joining us today. Absolutely. We're just going to keep having these conversations. So, and anybody that's listening, thank you, watching, thank you so much. Check us out at redwine.blue. We constantly have conversations like this, and we also provide lots of trainings and other events and online events, and help you get involved in your own community. So unless the two of you have anything else, that's my wrap up.
I just want to thank you again. Truly, thank you. This is awesome. You're amazing.
Thank you.